Good morning, everybody, and happy Monday. I can't believe it's Monday. This weekend went so fast. Hi, Masha. How are you?
I'm good. How's it going, Nancy?
Good. Let me go live on Instagram while I looked at it. Okay, so you guys know me. I'm Nancy Gansicoff, for business coach and body language trainer to interior designers, and I am here with Masha of Content Vertical. Masha is a copywriter, but so much more because words mean everything when you're running a business, correct?
That's right. And words is just one of the elements. You have to have a messaging strategy. If anything is strategic, and then you get to words. First the strategy, then words.
First the strategy, then the words. Okay, so today we're talking about someone's brand voice, which it's funny, right? Because people think, I don't know what my voice is. Like, what do you mean? So what do
Yeah.
you mean?
It's such a hard thing to define and understand. The good news is that everyone has a brand voice, whether you know it or not, whether it's defined or not, you have a brand voice. But I find that it's so difficult for my clients and other interior designers to understand, well, what is voice and how is it different if I am like a solopreneur, if I'm an interior designer? Is it different from my brand? Like, is my voice something else? And then my brand has its own voice. It's always like a hard thing to grasp what is brand voice. But essentially, brand voice is the personality of your brand, the style of communication. Basically, your brand voice is what you say and how your audience perceives it.
So for someone like me, it's like kind of like a no nonsense, direct,
Exactly. Yeah, like the key
dynamic.
thing that defines Nancy,
Yeah.
that's you, that's your brand voice. And like you said, like this is what you just said, no fluff, no BS. I don't exactly know what you just said, but
Yeah, we actually use that. No BS, no fluff. Like
yeah.
that is what we use for my brand because that is who I am as a person and it rolls over to my business, right? Just
Yeah.
kind of direct and to the point and
It's
so
authentic to you and it sets you apart. It sets your brand apart. That's why your clients pick you rather than another I don't
coach.
know, like maybe more gentler, or I don't know, however it
Right.
is, another
Right.
business coach, right?
Right. I was told I'm kind, but kind of strong, right? Kind
Yeah,
but strong.
straight to the
So
point. Yeah.
right. But for an interior designer, when they're listening to this, they're thinking, well, I'm organized, I'm nice, I'm talented, I'm creative, like all the
Yeah.
words they come up with. How do they transfer their voice? How do they
Yeah.
find it?
So I feel like I'm going to sound like a broken record, but you always start with getting to know your audience. And it doesn't matter if you're working with a copywriter, if you're working with a brand strategist, if you're working with a coach, if you're hiring, I don't know, a brand photographer, anyone, whoever you're going to hire to kind of get clear on your business and your marketing, you always start with your audience. Who are they? You have to have a very clear understanding of who your audience is, what are their challenges, what are their aspirations, what are the pain points that they have, what brings them to you, what's happening in their life that brings them to you to seek out an interior designer's help. So you always start with understanding your audience. Once you have that, and there are multiple ways of getting to know your audience. Maybe you're putting together one of those avatars, which I'm sure you help your clients put together.
Yes.
That's where you would start, right? Like an ICP or a client avatar.
Yeah.
Or maybe you sit down and kind of evaluate, okay, so where are, let's say, 5 of my lost clients came from, and then you sit down and kind of evaluate what's a common thread between them, because I'm sure there's a
Yes.
common thread. So once you sit down, evaluate that, and try to understand, okay, this is the thing that connects all the clients that come to me. So that's how you kind of gain that understanding of who my ideal client is. Not to say that sometimes we don't always work with our ideal clients, right? Sometimes
Correct.
sometimes we're at a stage in our business where we're pivoting, where we're changing directions, or just maybe up leveling. But it's important to understand, who do you want to work with? Who do you want to attract? And what do they all have in common? So you have to have a very clear understanding of your ideal audience. That's where you start.
Yes, and that was a good point you made. It doesn't mean we're all working with our ideal clients all
Yeah.
the time, but
Yeah.
have you worked with your ideal client? Have you worked with more than one of your ideal client? And can you then start finding that common denominator among them? And then why were they attracted to you? What about your self, your business, your voice, your messaging, something they were attracted to you, your imagery, something.
Yeah, exactly. I actually recently interviewed a brand photographer for my podcast, Marketing for Designers. And she said something interesting because she recognizes that we don't always work with ideal clients, because oftentimes that's why clients come to us, to both your business and my business, because they want to up level. They want to attract a premium, a better client. So she said, hey, if you've never worked with an ideal client, just find somebody from that group and just go for a coffee with them, or pick their brain, or find a reason to just chat with them and get to know them. And that's one way of getting to know your ideal client.
Yes, for sure. It's daunting for a lot of people who are introverts to just have a conversation with somebody and ask questions that are going to be so meaningful to them.
Mm-hmm.
But understand, and I'll just throw this in there, people love to help other people. So if you say, I would love to just ask you a couple of questions, it's going to help me grow my business, help me understand who I want to work with. Would you mind? And people are usually like very honored to be asked that.
Can I add something? People love to talk about themselves.
Oh, that's,
right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So back in the day when I was just starting my business, I actually wanted to work not with interior designers first, because at first I wasn't sure that this is going to be my niche. I actually wanted to work with real estate agents. And I had so many agents in my life that I literally called up 3 of them, went for a coffee 6 years ago. I went for a coffee with 3 of them. 2 of them ended up hiring me, but I ended up going for that coffee date, coffee chat, honestly saying that, promise I'm not going to sell anything. I just literally want to know, what are your challenges when it comes to marketing? What are like the things that I wanted to know that were important to you? Right. But for you, for an interior designer, it could be something else. It's like, hey, I just want to know, like, what sways your decision? What's important to you? What's a deal breaker? What kind of things would you be looking for if you were to hire an interior designer? Or maybe you have worked with an interior designer,
Right. Absolutely. So how do they find their brand voice?
Yeah. So number 1, we understand our ideal client. That's number 1. The second thing is you want to get, so now that we covered the audience, now it's time to kind of look inward and look at our brand. The second step is understand what are your core values and personality. And these are so important. I know everybody talks about it. Well, you have to know your core values, but I genuinely want people to sit down, take a look at it, and really write them down. Get clear on what your core values are. Because at the end of the day, that's not just for a check mark. That's not because we just want, I don't know, we want collaboration and that's one of our core values. But because you want to attract the kind of audience that feels the same way, that has similar values. So that's why it's so important to get clear on what are your core values. And examples could be, collaboration and teamwork. That's important to me as a brand. So at the end of the day, I want to attract the kind of audience for who collaboration is also important. Or maybe it's transparency, honesty, things like that.
Yes. It's so important. We have our company core values, which match my core values for the way I want to run my company. We actually talk about the core values once a quarter at the team meeting, so everybody knows what the values are. And some of the core values are never let anyone go unanswered too long, right? Be attentive.
I like that. Yeah.
Quality control. Everybody on my team check twice before it goes to the next person. If Nancy wouldn't want it out in the world, don't put it out in the world, right? Like core values, things that are important to me. Never let anyone on the team wait for too long for an answer from each other. And these are things that as a business owner really flow over to my team side and my client side. So for everyone who's listening, do you have a list of your core values, both for your company, for yourself, and how you conduct business, right? And I love what you said, attracting people who either admire your core values, want to have similar core values, have the similar core values as you is really important. So letting that out there is key on their public facing assets, like their website and their social media and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I love what you said, that you're not just, so it's important not just to get clear on your core values, but to actually live it. Actually live it. And you said that you have quarterly meetings. So you're literally reviewing them every quarter. It's like, okay, how are we implementing it? How is this actually being implemented in our business every day?
Absolutely. Because if you think about it, I know for me, and a lot of designers have virtual assistants, right? I have all virtual assistants. So they work for other people sometimes. So we meet every other week as a team, but also once a quarter, we go over what my core values are to remind everybody that I'm still watching, and I want
Yes.
everyone to adhere to these values. Otherwise, maybe you don't want to work with me. Even my
Mm-hmm.
clients know my core values as well. So they know that I am somebody who doesn't want anyone to suffer for too long. If you have a question, I have it in my system to make sure I'm answering them quickly. But what
Mm-hmm.
does an interior designer have in their system that brings
Mm-hmm.
out their core values to their
Yeah.
clients, right?
And you actually brought a good point about virtual assistants. So you have people that are working with you. So another reason why we should all have core values is because it helps us run the smooth operation where everything is consistent. If you are, I'm
Yes.
I'm often in touch with at least two of your people, like Pamela and Sally, like and I understand. I can see the consistency between what Nancy sounds like and they sound like because they represent your brand.
Correct. And that's comes from the leader of the company, right? So as an interior
Exactly.
designer, you're a principal designer. Everything you believe in has to come from above and then
Hmm.
be communicated to your clients
Yeah.
and communicated to your staff. So I love it. So find out who your ideal client is,
Yeah.
really deep dive into it,
Yeah.
then make
Core
sure you
values.
understand your core values so that
Yeah.
you can bring this on. Okay.
Yeah. And then the personality, defining your personality. So it's like if you were to think of your brand as this persona, how do you want to sound like? What do you want to be known for? So find a few words that kind of really truly represent and feel good, feel true to you, to your brand of what you stand for. How do you want to show up in the world? If you, how do you want your audience to see you? So it's important to get clear on your values, but also your personality of the brand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like give it a name, give it some type of characteristic. And like I said, you got to live with that. So that's number 2. Number 3 is you want to decide how you want people, your ideal clients, to feel when they engage with your brand. So that's very important. What kind of feeling do you want to evoke in people? Do you want them to think that you are a pro? Do you want them to think like we're just chatting as friends? Do you want them to think that you're confident and that's kind of almost rubs off on them? Like, how do you want? So that's a very important. We're talking about feelings. We're talking about an emotion that you want people to feel when they engage with your brand. It's oftentimes when you land on somebody's website, don't you just feel something right away? Like you can just tell with the visuals, with the choice of words that they use, with all the things, and you're like, oh, okay, like she's a pro. And sometimes we can actually put it in words. And that's
Yes.
what I'm talking about. What is that thing that you want people to feel? How do you want people to feel?
It's it sounds so easy when we're all talking about it,
Yeah.
right? But it's not easy.
Yeah.
How do you draw it out of people?
Yeah. So I'll tell you how to actually drawing it out of people. Well, yeah, you got to do some work. You got to do some work and understand what these things are. But then what I recommend as my 4th step is actually document your voice. It's going to be a bit of work up front, but it's going to help you tremendously, especially if you are growing, scaling your business. A lot of your designers, I'm sure, are at the stage where they're hiring content creators or virtual assistant or
Well,
basic.
yeah, because once I get them making more money, they
Right.
have money to now hire copywriters, web
Yeah.
designers, bookkeepers, things that they need to run their business.
So they have these new people coming into their business or they're getting a team. How do you want to make sure that they sound like me? You want to make sure that everyone represents your brand. So I always recommend documenting your voice. So there's a service, obviously I perform that service too, to when you can hire a copywriter or another service provider to actually document your brand voice and messaging
Mhm.
guide. So when you have that guide, the key pillars are there. So what you'll have there is who's my audience. And it's so nice to have this one document. Sometimes people call it like a brand DNA, but it's like a Bible. It's that document that literally states who's your audience, who actually I've seen guides where it says who is your audience and who is not your audience, who
I
is
like
my
that.
kind of client, because it's awesome. Like I think it's so important to know who you want to work with, but it's also important to know who you definitely do not want to work with, right?
Yes.
Because that's an important insight. Then you want to include in that guide, your mission, your values, your core values, your personality. You also want to include kind of voice nuances, like the do's and don'ts. This is how I sound like, always this, but never this. So you want to have kind of 2 columns of these words and insights. And it's so important because then you pass that. First of all, it's the document that should always be open on your screen, because anytime you're drafting a client communication, a social media post, you're revisiting your website messaging, I don't know, you're doing a client intake questionnaire, something like that. But it always, you can always revisit that guide. Or like I said earlier, if you're hiring someone, send it on. Imagine how easy or how much easier it would be to onboard somebody into your business. And it's like, this is me. This is how it sounds. This is how we sound like. This is the kind of words we use. For example, things I've included in the guides. We never use jargon, or we never swear, or sometimes you do swear, sometimes you use that, sometimes you use humor. If that's your brand, if it feels authentic to you, make sure it's part of your brand guide. So when you ask me, how do you define that? You sit down, you do the work, you understand your audience, you understand your brand, and then you document it. Because once it's on the paper, it becomes so much easier in your mind. Okay, this is me. This is literally how I sound like. Oftentimes in the guide, I include things like, what are my core stories? Core stories is something like, anytime I'm writing a social media post, I have my go-to. Let's say, I think I have about 8 or 10 of them. So I always talk about how I started my business. I always talk about, the types of challenges that my clients, interior designers, struggle with. I always talk about my kids. That's one of my core stories. I always talk about the funny things. I always talk about the things that I love, like bubble tea and coffee. All of these things are your core stories.
Oh, I didn't know you like bubble tea. I like
Oh
bubble
my God.
tea too.
Are you kidding me? This is like the go-to in my family. If my husband ever wants to make me happy, he shows up with bubble tea. That's it's the thing. It's the thing. I'm rebranding right now, so it's making its way to my website right now.
Oh, funny.
But yeah, but you know what I mean? That's like you just said it. Oh my God, I didn't know you like it.
And I love it too. So
and it resonated with you, and you're my kind of client. And in fact, you are my client. So it's the thing. It's these little moments that kind of set you apart, but also connect you to the people that you want to be connected to.
Yes. Yeah. I love it.
I love it. So yeah, and definitely document your list, right? Yeah. Well, we should have like an archive of all of these things, because I don't know if you've ever felt like you have a big team, but for somebody who's a solopreneur and they log on to their Instagram, it's like, okay, what am I going to talk about today? Open up your guide. There is 10 core stories, and these are your go-to. And I'm not saying post them as is, but these are your core themes. These are the themes that you can continuously talk about. So not only it's great to attract the right clients, but it's also great to make your marketing so much easier.
Yeah, it gives you clarity when you get confused.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to have a brand voice messaging guide, because if nothing else, then it gives you clarity. It gives you clarity. It gives you clarity as far as who your audience is, and it gives clarity to others that are coming into your business to help you. If you're hiring and growing.
So smart. I remember when I got branded many moons ago now, but every time I bring out the branding guide, it's still me.
Right? That's amazing.
It's so weird. They came up with sentences that I should use in my brand and imagery that I haven't looked at that in ages, but every time I look at it, I go, they nailed it back then. They were good. They nailed it. Just like you get to the core of who somebody is.
Yeah.
How they attract their ideal client, and then how to get it done.
Exactly. And that's actually a good point you just brought up. You haven't looked at it in a couple of years. I think it's also important to revisit it once in a while, because you've grown, you've evolved, certain things have changed. Maybe you like a different flavor of bubble tea. I don't know.
But I don't even know what flavor I like. I just order randomly. But
so that's the thing. It needs to evolve with you as you're growing, as you're evolving. Revisit but start somewhere. So start documenting it. I'm just looking at my notes here, but yeah. So things like core brand values, target audience profile, voice characteristics, do's and don'ts, messaging pillars, examples of voice and use. That's actually an important one. Examples of voice and use. Oftentimes I do include little snippets of Instagram captions, like, this is what you should sound like.
Yes.
And it just makes it so much easier, because every time you're starting from scratch or somebody else is writing on your behalf and you're like, whoa, I would never say that.
Yes.
Well, you should have a brand voice guide.
Right. Because then
you
the
know.
person who's writing for you will also understand how you should sound.
Exactly. Yes.
All
So
right.
that's how you find Brent Voice.
Tell everyone how to find you and what they can look for on your site to help.
Sounds good. So you can find me on my website, contentvertical.com, which is currently rebranding, should be live in July. But you can also find me on my Instagram, masha.copywriter, or on my podcast, Marketing for Designers. Every Wednesday, there's a new episode talking about all things marketing, from brand strategy to SEO to web design and all of those fun things.
So awesome. I got to get listening to your podcast.
Yeah.
I haven't even listened to podcasts.
I would love that if you do.
Oh my God, yes. All right, everyone, go have a great Monday. Thank you again, Masha, for being here. Always amazing information. If anyone wants to go to my YouTube channel, Nancy Ganzikoffer, and go look for the Message Mastering playlist, you'll get all of Masha's great advice over the months that she has given us and continues to give us. So we'll see you next month. Masha, thank you. Bye, everyone.